the brain would say. What do we got? What do we got? There we go. Here's the music. Okay. So Earl Father Hines. Evening, Chris.
Yes, it is, ladies and gentlemen. Father
Hey,
Hines
Mona.
and his great band playing for you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's great
Hey,
South
y'all, let's
Side.
start this
Ready now
hootenanny,
for 30 minutes
as the great
of
but problematic Bubba Bo Bob Brain would say.
Yeah.
His comments to Dolly Parton were a little problematic, and also his plan to take over the world.
What could this
You know.
be? Ah, it's a
Hey,
letter
Octavio, hey, Gladys, hey, Jim, Jean, Ellen, and Timothy, and Martin. Evening all around. Hey, Miles, you gonna hop up? We got Miles down here. Cover your contract, Miles. You've been clawing me all afternoon. Hey, Tony and Egg Harbor. Hey, Timothy. Martin, Heather, Larry. All you assorted Mysterians. Got some new footage for this tour tonight. It should be fun. Miles. Here, buddy. Here, buddy. Oh, awesome, Octavio. Hey, Vicky. Hey, Jim. Miles. Are you just going to be bothering me tonight, or what? Evening, Jeff. Hey, Marie. Here he comes. Hey, Miles, have a seat, okay? Just have a seat. It's all right. Miles. 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 Hey, Timothy. Hey, Londa. Yeah, there's only one way to hawk. Evening, everybody. Alright, you just show him your butt there, Miles. Just say right there. It's alright. Yeah, aw. Nice. Hey, Jerry.
what you call a powerhouse.
Hey, everybody.
Yeah, Earl Father Hines carries on now and presents Leroy Harris to sing Teacher's Pet.
Miles. It's much easier for me if you stay on the other side of the computer. There you go. Thank you. Emerita, hey everybody. Welcome along. Okay, yeah, just get right in the way. Perfect. Miles, just settle down, please. You are bothering me. You've been bothering me all day. This boy. Hey, Amy. Octavio, you're right. I should definitely tell Pringles that the guy on their can looks just like an antique serial killer. I'm sure they'd be very glad of me pointing that out. Miles, you're about to roll right off of this thing. Let's move over to here, shall we? There. Betsy, yeah, the chimney guy was alright. No problem there. we'll see who sees what shadow tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday, right? Yeah. I've totally lost all track of what day it is. I know tomorrow I got a gig. Hey, Mariana. I feel like this thing moves a little bit up. Look out, everybody. There we go. Miles. Hey, Emily. Heather, I'll live stream it here at 7. Haven't played a gig in a long time. So, I don't know, I got a whole set list ready to go. I've got my set list. Some of it is songs I haven't played in like 20 years. Hey, Noreen. Hey, Dawn. Miles. Miles, you want to just do the Miles show tonight? You want to take this one for me and I'll just relax? Hey, Noreen, anybody I might have missed? Hey, Katie. Yep. Hey, Johann. Miles. Are you gonna hit like the stop streaming button if I'm not careful? Miles, you got this. You do it tonight, okay? You can work tonight. It is Hochtober. Hey, happy birthday, Susan. Megan, glad you liked it. I went in last week too, but I was only there for a minute. I couldn't really get a space. Tracy, yes it is. Hey, Gina.
Have a little Father Hines melody of the Colorado sunset.
Hey, everybody. Miles had been, apparently he was very bad while I was gone. Hey, Chris. Megan, I have never dined there. That's new. All right, hop on down, Miles. Good boy. Hey, Brian. Hey, Kendra. Hey, Judy. Judy should be sound. People are hearing me. Unless he just messed it up. Doreen, yes. Yes, I am. But I still got a couple of days worth of stuff to do. I am having some Buffalo Trace. Hey, Ben. Hey, Grandma Bell. We'll let Earl Father Hines play a little bit more here. We'll get ready in a moment. We'll let Earl Father Hines do one more tune.
Earl Father Hines gives us a bit of jive under the general heading of So Help Me.
I went through all the stuff I found at Trinity Church in the archives and ended up finding A really cool connection to Peggy Schuyler. I mean, Angelica and Eliza are buried there, but not Peggy. But now I can write about Peggy in the book. Connected to a guy there whose funeral was so out of control that they trashed Trinity Church. They had like 90 bottles of wine, and eventually were fined for damage to the pews and the windows and the cleanup fees. So probably that would have been the day that the Schuyler sisters trashed Trinity Church. Hey Judy, glad to have you with sound now. Letting Earl Father Hines finish up this tune, then we will get started talking about Johann Hoch, this gentleman. And here I am poking his armpit. If they'd had 99 bottles of wine, they probably would have gone through 99 of them. Cindy, that does sound good. Oh yeah, I know Patty was going to be talking sewers tonight. And I'll be at her party she's got a party coming up, where we all have to bring in old artwork to defend. It's kind of the whole point of my gig tomorrow, too, so. She's a little younger than I am, so, like, the rule is it has to be something at least 5 years old. It's like, oh, yeah, art from when I was a spry, young 37-year-old. All right, we're letting Earl Father Hines finish up this tune, and then we will get started properly, everybody. Well, hey, Rose. And hey, Elaine. Johann, love it. They'll probably still be doing Whiskey and a Cookie over on Patty's page. I just won't be able to join. Unless they run really late and I take off right after the gig, which I might. Evening, Mike and Jake. All right, there's Earl wrapping it up.
We're about halfway through this jive concert by Earl.
Halfway through this jive concert. A little more because I took out one of the songs that I can't stand. But all right, everybody, welcome along. I'm Adam Seltzer from Mysterious Chicago Tours. I have been a tour guide and historian here in Chicago for going on 20 years now. Got about a dozen Chicago history books. I'm on the History Channel and the Travel Channel all the time. Author of such books as Mysterious Chicago, the book, H.H. Holmes, The True History of the White City Devil, Murder Maps, USA, and Graceland Cemetery, Chicago's Stories, Symbols, and Secrets. So I am, of course, incredibly famous. You should definitely pay attention to everything I say, especially about old Johann here, shown here with two heads, or Johann Hoch with another hand and another head and some hands growing out of his crotch. He would. So this is the guy who is the subject of not my next book. My next book is going to be about Trinity and St. Paul's churchyards in New York, but the one after that will in all likelihood be Johann Hoch, coming out through Arcadia/The History Press in the next, probably towards the end of the year, I would say. Book is just about ready now. I'm still making sure that I've covered everything and gotten every piece of data on the guy, even though they've given me an awfully low word count. But we found all kinds of cool stuff. Just last week in New York, I found some wedding paperwork that established that he was, in fact, one of the parties in a wedding that I suspected was him, which takes the number of wives that I can ascribe to this guy up over 20. I believe he married at least 22 different women over the course of his career. There are probably more of them that we don't know about. At least 5 of them ended up dead. So we're going to start out on the train. Here he is. There's actually a subhead to an article that I found in New York in the microfilm room. Not attractive. This is Johann Hoch writing and talking to a rather unamused-looking Evelyn Campbell, who was a reporter for the Chicago American, as they went aboard the train, the Nickel Plate Railroad from New York to Chicago, where Johann Hoch was going to be standing trial for bigamy and for murder. So here he is as he looked up after they got him nice and cleaned up. Now, as he became a media story, people were coming out of the woodwork all over the place saying, I married and was deserted by a guy who looked just like that. Hoch's insistence was, no, well, everybody is just, well, I can't really imitate him properly. He talked like a German character on The Simpsons. But he said, oh, all the women for Johann go crazy, but they are mistaking me, yeah? So he got them to, and while he was in jail in Chicago, he arranged to go to a barber and pose with these guys around the jail who he said looked exactly like him. Now, many of the people who said that they'd married him were, in fact, mistaking him for somebody else, but it's really a weird kind of flex because none of these guys really look much like him to me. But he gathered them all together and said, you got very lucky. You resemble a handsome man. The ladies can't resist you when they know you look like Johann Hoch. So, Hoch was on trial for the murder of a woman named Marie Walker, who ran a candy store here in Lincoln Park. He looked about like this at the time. But right about here in the corner on Willow Street would have been Marie Walker's candy store. He placed an ad in a German-language newspaper saying, I'm a wealthy widow looking for a wife. Marie's sister answered it on her behalf. She was a recent divorcee from a guy named Emil Walker. She had moved to the United States just a couple of years before from Germany. So Hoch came to the candy store here and told her, yep, I'm rich. In fact, I have this house on Union Avenue, 63rd and Union, across from what is now the Disco Salad Bar, in what is presently an empty lot. But used to have a house here that looked just like this. So Marie talked to him for about half an hour. Then he said, I like you, you like me. We can get married then, yeah? And she said, yes, if what you say is true, I'm sure that's all right. So they went down and checked out the house, and she came back and told her sister, this is even better than I thought. This guy is rich. He's loaded. He has more money than he told me in the first place. Then shortly after the wedding, Marie began to get sick. Her sister Emily came to help take care of her, even though they'd been horribly estranged. They had come over on the ship from Germany together, but they didn't really talk. And in fact, it was reported later that she might have moved in with Marie's ex-husband at one point, possibly even having stolen her husband. I don't see why anybody would really want to be with Emil. The divorce picture paints a very ugly record. But soon after, Marie got sick and died of apparent kidney trouble. She's buried over here at Oakwood Cemetery. Now, while the body was still on the bed in the house, Hoch proposed to Emily, her sister, and said, to the dead belong the dead, to the living belong the living. So they were making arrangements to get married at the burial, and got married the next day out in Joliet. Day after that, they went to Marie's bank and took out her money. I went to Amelia's bank and took out her money. They'd already gotten Marie's by then. And the day after that, Hoch disappeared and went to New York. So we got to cover a little bit about what the police and newspaper scene were like here in Chicago in 1905. This is Chief Francis O'Neill down at Oakwood Cemetery, Mount Olivet Cemetery. He was the chief of police at the time. His chief inspector was a guy by the name of George M. Shippey, who was frankly kind of a nut. This is what newspapers had looked like 10 years before. This was one of the big extra edition headlines of the H.H. Holmes story. This is what they looked like in 1905, a decade after this. Like this. They had figured out the benefit. Finally, it took newspapers a really long time to figure out that an attractive front page helped sell copies. So the Chicago American started in 1900. They had these massive headlines. They would go up to like 480-point font. They had a lot more fun with it. They were also using new photographs like they were a new toy, which really is what they were. Just about a month before, they'd had the Dove murder story where they recreated the crime. And you had to really read carefully to see that this was just a recreation, not an actual shot of the death. Around the same time had also been the mystery of Marshall Field Jr.'s death. They were the one paper that was willing to say maybe it wasn't just an accident. They were pretty willing to talk about anything. This was a William Randolph Hearst paper. They now have a terrible reputation, but a lot of that really is just from smears by Hearst rivals back at the time. I read all of these papers. They were not much more exaggerated than anyone else. In fact, they included a lot more detail than a lot of other papers. And a lot of times when I can fact check that detail, it does tend to hold up. So one of their reporters lived up here in Lincoln Park. One of their star reporters at the time, one of the first to get an individual byline, not only that, but a portrait next to the article sometimes. Here at the Brewster Apartments. And that reporter's name was Evelyn Campbell. She was their star reporter at the time. She worked on lots of different cases. Now, when word came out, now the guy who was the city editor of the Chicago American later claimed that it was his own eagle eye noticing this weird name Johann Hoch turning up in both the burial permits and the wedding permits one day. So he sent a reporter out to see what was up and found that Amelia Fisher had already gone to the police saying she'd been robbed by this guy and also her sister had just died. This became an instant media sensation as more and more people started reporting, hey, I married that guy too and he disappeared, or my sister married that guy and then she died. So Evelyn got right on the case, and pretty sure they were saying, are you following Miss Campbell's Hoch clues? The detectives are. This was a very good idea. A lot of people were, for whatever reason, reluctant to go to the police when they had information. They were a lot more comfortable going to Evelyn, and also a lot more sure that they were going to get a reward, because the Chicago American did generally pay for scoops. Often that pay was just like a box of chocolate or something. But still. So we're going to go back. We can trace Hoch's career in the United States back to Wheeling, West Virginia, back in 1895. Now, he showed up and bought a saloon right about where this is now. In fact, this might be the same building. I couldn't tell for sure. But he bought a saloon on Jacob Street. And shortly thereafter, married a woman by the name of Carolyn, pictured here, whose own husband, Johann Adolf Hoch, had died a couple of years before. What are some of these pictures? I'm missing a bunch of the pictures in here, but they were married by her minister, the Reverend Haas, pictured here looking very confused. And Hoch just charmed everybody. He ran a saloon that was really, really free with credit, so much so that people thought it must be a front for some kind of a bigger game. He told stories about how he had recently been one of the very few people who survived the shipwreck of the Elba, a ship that had crashed into another, causing it to sink and killing just about everybody aboard. Now, after marrying Carolyn, who was a widow possessed of some money and some property, she immediately became sick. Reverend Haas was immediately suspicious. But she was buried out at what was called Red Men's Cemetery. Reverend Haas got really suspicious and started going around the drugstores trying to figure out what this guy calling himself Jacob Huff had been buying. Then days later, Hoch's clothes were found on the banks of the Ohio River. Next to it was a watch. Now, they all knew him under the name Jacob Huff, but on the inside they could see that he had scratched off the name Jacob Schmidt. This fooled absolutely nobody. The idea was he thought it would look like he had drowned himself, but nobody doubted it. Nobody believed it. Reverend Haas wrote to some towns that he had mentioned in Germany and found out that he was a guy who had left behind a few kids back there on a run from some kind of fraudulent bankruptcy charge. He was apparently married to a woman by the name of Anna back there. I have no idea whether this is really a picture of her or not. But having faked his death, he took Carolyn's ex-husband's name, Johann Adolf Hoch, and moved to Chicago, where he opened a saloon near Milwaukee and Western. Right about where we are here. Had a buddy named Benno Lecter and said, hey, Benno, I'm looking for a wife. The guy was just really full of himself, bragging to everybody about what a great chemist he was and what a great soldier he had been. He was flush with having gotten away with murder, really. He had poisoned Caroline, and even people who were suspicious didn't want to dig up the body to see if there was any poison inside of it. So she was living up on Belmont here, right near where the bucket of blood would one day be. Oh, Benno's cousin, Julia, Marie Julia Steinbrecher. Though he met her, very quickly they got married. And once again, she got sick. And she was telling people, I think this man is poisoning me. He is not what he pretends to be. And everybody just brushed it off as her being delirious. So they lived up here on Belmont. There's another shot of the space where it would have been. My old car. Would have been right about here. Conveniently located near the Kraups funeral home. Now, when she died about 6 weeks after the wedding, there were people who were suspicious. One even tried to stop the funeral procession, but Hoch showed a doctor's certificate saying she had died of nephritis, a kidney disease. So she was buried here at Graceland Cemetery in an unmarked grave. But most likely she had been poisoned with arsenic. Arsenic is an element. It doesn't biodegrade down to anything else. So if they used a decent casket, there's an excellent chance it is still buried there. The murder weapon is still here in the cemetery. Just shortly thereafter, he married a woman who lived here on Ward Street, now Wayne Street, by the name of Mary Rankin. She was already married to at least 2 men at the time. She was trying to swindle him. That fell apart very, very quickly. Now, he spent a few years after this. He married another woman named Martha. He married a woman who shortly thereafter died in Cincinnati, married another woman in Cincinnati, then a woman in New York, then another woman in New York, then another woman back in Chicago, then another woman in New York. There was a woman in San Francisco in the middle of all of that. We're still putting all of this together. For a while, he went to jail for selling mortgage furniture and even made the news at the time as a guy who had several different wives. But in prison, he acted as though he were insane and wouldn't really talk to anybody. After getting out, he ended up meeting a woman by the name of Mary Girk. I think that's how to pronounce her name now. I don't think there's really an E at the end of it, as there usually was. But she was operating a boarding house, which I believe was this same house. It looked about like this. So he met her and married her. And she came up to him one day and said, look, here's an ad for a hypnotism course. And it was a course about how to become a spirit medium. We should learn this. And he told her there was nothing in it, but she insisted, so he went along with it for a while. And eventually had a whole trunk full of magician's gloves and magic tricks and disguises and hypnotism stuff, including a whole course from Professor Harridan and a certificate saying that he had completed the task, completed the work. Now, when this story broke out, I'll show you about how newspapers reacted, finding out that Johann Hoch was connected to hypnotism. About like this. There were stories going around that Hoch had been hypnotizing people with the aid of a magic zither. Reverend Haas said he was very proficient in the zither. This came out quite a bit. Women swear that Hoch is a mesmerist. Hoch a hypnotist, 26 wives. Or this particular picture. This is based on something that Catherine Kummerl, who he was hiding with, though she didn't know it right away, said he would grab her wrists and stare directly into her eyes, and she would feel completely under his power. Eventually, he got a house in Pullman. He was living with a family named Kane at what was then Watt Street, right across from the Hotel Florence. While he was living there, here's a picture by Kristen. While he was living in this place, he met Anna Hendricks. She saw one of his matrimonial ads in the papers and said, oh, here's this old codger. I'll just write to him and fool him a little bit. But then she fell for him. And they ended up getting married under his real name, John Jacob Schmidt, lacking only the Jingleheimer. So he married her. They moved to her place, conveniently located near the jail. Then he played what was really his usual trick. He said, listen, my father has just died. I have to go to Germany to get all of his money. But I'll need your money to get over to Germany in the first place. Can we go to your bank and get all of your money out? So she got him about $500. And then he just went off to buy the tickets and never came back. He gave her a nice little wave, and she later said, that was all I got for my $500. A wave and a ta-ta. So, after these stories came out, there was a massive manhunt for Hoch, who was in hiding at the time. Turned out that he was in a boarding house. Here, let's do a whole map showing where he went. He was in New York, specifically hiding out at a boarding house in what is now Hell's Kitchen, just west of Times Square, on 47th Street. It was a boarding house pub occupied primarily by German families, operated by a woman by the name of Catherine Kummerl. Now, Catherine noticed right away this weird boarder came in and said, "Hey, you should marry me. Look, I'm really good at peeling potatoes. I could eat a whole peck of potatoes." And she did recall that she had never seen a man eat more potatoes than Johann Hoch ate. And he kept on pressing her, "We should get married." But what she said later in hindsight was she had been married a couple times before and said, "It disgusted me when men tried to make love to me. I didn't want another husband. My children were already grown." So he kept on insisting and even apparently tried to hypnotize her. That's what she later said anyway. But then she remembered she'd been reading about this awful man in Chicago. And one day while she was riding the train, she saw a picture in one of the newspapers and realized that looks just like the guy who's staying at my house, that awful man in Chicago. So she bought a copy of the paper, went home reading it and saying, "Now I ought to be married to this guy instead. He seems like he's got a lot of money." Later she saw Hoch in the mirror trying to change up his appearance. So she ran to the nearest police station. We got a time-lapse video now so we can recreate her run down 47th Street to the police station. Run, Catherine, run! Watch out for that guy. Watch out for that guy. Pause to look at the skyscrapers that definitely weren't there then. Wander down 47th Street through Hell's Kitchen towards Times Square. Past the Noodle Place. Pause to look at those cool buildings. Then get on the rest of the way across. And there, where the playground is now, once upon a time, that was where the police station was. So the police came down to the building and talked to this guy for a while, then said, "Okay, how you doing, Hoch?" And he said, "All right, I'm fine. My name's not Hoch, though. I don't know what you mean." So Johann Hoch was caught with all sorts of clippings about himself in his pocket, and a fountain pen that was loaded with arsenic, which he said was for headache powders. So back in Chicago, they located Anna, they located Elizabeth Girk, and they located Amelia Fisher, three of his three most recent Chicago wives that we know of. And they all got together for the first time, and Anna's first words were, "Well, I never thought it would come to this." I love that she said, "Well, I never." Minnie Rankin at this time was still insisting that she'd only met Hoch. She didn't actually know him and certainly didn't marry him. A couple of days later, she would finally break down and admit it. But yeah, wonderful hats. They look like they're about to break into a chorus of Pick a Little, Talk a Little. Or maybe talk about Balzac. But Anna in particular seems to have been, unlike the others, she definitely seems to have spoken German. She talked German with Hoch, but from what records I've been able to find, and it's very difficult to find reliable records about her, but she, according to the census, was born in Iowa. So that's an interesting twitch. She spoke English a lot better than the others did. So Evelyn Campbell decided I should take her to New York. She can identify this guy who's been caught there as Johann Hoch, and that'll pretty much solve the case. Because of her identification, we'll be able to bring him back to Chicago. This might have just been a little bit of theater. He'd already admitted that he was the man wanted in Chicago. But Evelyn Campbell and Anna Hendricks went up to New York, where Anna identified him. She walked up to a bunch of men in a lineup, went to him and said, "Well, John." He said, "I'm sorry, Mary," and then was shuffled away. So at this point, they had their identification. You can see Evelyn standing in the back there. She'd been working on the case for a solid 2 weeks, and here she was confronted with the guy. Hoch was taken from the 47th Street police station down to the police headquarters on Mulberry Street, which was right across from the Puck building. They've got this gold statue of Puck there. I think it was laid at the home of Grace Adler Design on Will and Grace. It was the home of Puck magazine, one of the most famous humor magazines at the time. And police headquarters was right here where this parking garage is now. Let's go into the parking garage, shall we? So in a cell in this place, Hoch invented a whole new persona for himself. Maybe he just calculated, this is the persona that will most ingratiate me to people. Maybe he'd seen the Puck building across the street and thought, humor, that's what people want. But this was really his skill. He would find out what they want and be that guy for a month. He decided he was going to recast himself as this total joker. Now, most of the time when he's in the newspapers, early on especially, he was cracking jokes constantly. People compared him to a German dialect comedian, just a total goofball. But he hadn't been described as that before. And it's not a persona that would last very long. His persona changed based on who he was with. With one Chicago wife, he was a very pious man who prayed all the time. Marie Walker, his last Chicago victim, didn't think much of the church, so he talked about what a religious skeptic he was. But every other day, while they waited to get all the paperwork in from Chicago to have him extradited, they would have to walk him to the Jefferson Market Police Court to get paperwork to hold him for another 48 hours. The easiest way to do this would have been to cut through Washington Square Park. There's really no data as to exactly how they would have gotten him there, but they were trying to break away from crowds. But I did do a time lapse that would roughly recreate how they might have gone from Mulberry Street to Jefferson Market. Here we go. Pause to give somebody directions. Here we go through the East Village into the West Village, passing Edgar Allan Poe's old house, passing Cornelia Street and Jones Street, making our way past this cool diner, and all the way up to the old Jefferson Market Police Court, which is now a library. Now again, we don't know exactly which route they took to get there. They never actually covered that in the papers, but all through the walk, Evelyn was interviewing him. She got a lot of great quotes. He would kind of change dates around and go back and forth between denying having married someone and admitting having married someone. Finally, she ended one by saying, "So, if you were still married to Mrs. Hendricks, then you must be a very bad man." He said, but behind every bad man, there is a bad woman. So we don't know exactly the route. They might have gone up Cornelia Street and gone right by Taylor Swift's old townhouse. Or they might have gone up the next block over and gone up Jones Street towards West 4th, so they would have been passing right over the spot where the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan cover was. Why, Johann and Evelyn might have been walking along just like that. How many steps did I get to film that? I don't know, but I average about 25,000 steps a day in New York. But here's the inside. The Jefferson Market Police Court retains some of its style, but it was renovated in the 1960s. It's now the library. It's really cool. While I was there, a group of children were singing a rousing rendition of Old MacDonald Had a Farm. But eventually the paperwork came in, and Hoch and Evelyn rode on the train all the way to Chicago. Several other reporters were there too. But this is Hoch. He was handcuffed to Detective Loftus of New York, or of Chicago, and Evelyn interviewed him all the way back. Other people did as well. He would change the facts around constantly, lied constantly, but mostly made an absolute goofball of himself. Evelyn spotted the game right away. He was trying to ingratiate himself and make himself agreeable to the police officers, hoping that would help him get an easier time in jail. Initially, he was held at the old Chicago Avenue police station, but brought in for inquests to meet up with all of his ex-wives here at the old criminal court building. The jail was right back behind this. Now Minnie Rankin came in, and they had a good time calling each other Bluebeards. Mary came in, and they yelled at each other a little bit. Initially, she was very nervous. When he first left her, he tried the same trick on her he always did, saying, "Hey, I need money to go pick up my inheritance." And she said, "No, I don't think so." And he said, "Watch out, I'll hypnotize you." And she said, "I'll hypnotize you." And then he just left, having only gotten $25 out of her. Emily came in and called him, "You hound," then forgave him completely. Here he is with Jailer Whitman, with whom he was pretty friendly with this guy. But newspapers took a lot of photographs of him, so we got the whole many moods of Johann Hoch. Here he is, puzzled, inquisitive, observing, attentive, nodding, aroused. There's Johann Hoch looking aroused. And here he is with the coroner, the chief inspector, and a couple of detectives, and a detective. Now this actually looks more like, these guys all look more like him than the guys he posed with around this same time. But he went to get his hair cut, and they asked, are the barbers ladies? And Shippy said, no, I think I would not send you to barbers that are ladies. He had already proposed to the jail matron. But they went to a barber shop in the Bush Temple of Music, which still stands. And that's where he was photographed with the guys who he thought resembled him so much. Meanwhile, he was getting like valentines in jail and offers of marriage. One of them was signed Carrie Nation, who was a violent anti-liquor proponent. She would go in with like an axe and bust up all of the liquor in bars. Presumably somebody sent a valentine signed by her, hoping that Hoch would marry her and then kill her. But he was greeted by crowds everywhere he went. People would come and joke at him, and he would joke right back. And he would tell people all of his techniques. He said, none of this was ever a love affair for me. I was all just a business thing. Now, initially, the police said they believed Emily Fisher was an accomplice, that she had been complicit in her sister's murder. They dropped that line of inquiry partly, I think, because they wanted her to testify. But her story just got weirder and weirder. She ended up completely forgiving Johann, insisting that he didn't do anything. Her sister had been sick the entire time. She published several affidavits to that effect, but she did testify at the trial, and they did determine that there was arsenic in Marie's body, and they determined that the undertaker had not used arsenic in the embalming fluid. Hoch had a particularly incompetent lawyer, a guy named Isidore Plotke. Now, one thing that never got noticed at the time was that Plotke had also been Marie's divorce lawyer. I have no idea how that never came out. It's obviously how Hoch must have known about the guy. But after a long period of going back and forth, he was convicted and sentenced to hang. They went back and forth on these things. He kept on getting reprieves of about a month, reprieves of another month to work on his case, and even people who were his staunchest critics would say, yeah, we should definitely give him a reprieve. The only reason he hasn't gotten his case to the Supreme Court is he doesn't have the money. That would be a tragedy if we hanged somebody because he didn't have the money. And newspaper reporters still noticed that there was this dual nature in him. One day he'd be the most gentle guy. He gave up on the goofball persona pretty early and just became this gentle guy who would go to speak to the boys in the boys' school in the jail and preach little sermons and tell everybody how to be a model citizen. And then other times he'd be Mr. Hyde down below. This was what they called the death chamber. This was one comfortable room in the jail. Hoch was brought there for the last night of his life more than once because he kept getting these last-minute reprieves. But before that, he would be sitting here praying with jailer Whitman, and everybody agreed who spoke to him that he had a very good grasp on theology. But this is a fairly mocked-up picture of the death march, or how it would have looked when he was walked up. But right when they were about ready to hang him, his new lawyer, he'd gotten a new lawyer named Frank Comerford, who was dating a Chicago Chronicle reporter who thought that he was innocent and would marry her a couple of months later. They went before Judge Kennesaw Mountain Landis and got a couple hours of reprieve. And Judge Landis would later become the first commissioner of baseball. He's the guy from the center of the Black Sox scandal. He's the guy whose face is on MVP trophies. Always known to be an unpredictable character. He was joined, her lawyer Comerford was joined by a guy who had previously been a lawyer for H.H. Holmes. Another connection that they never mentioned at the time. But the Chicago American was all set for a really big sale on the day that Hoch was hanged. They wrote up everything. They wrote up a whole story of his hanging in advance. They didn't say anything specific. They just said the same thing they always did about how it was drafty, how the atmosphere was solemn, how they could hear the crowds outside, stuff that was guaranteed to be correct after it was published. But then, when this reprieve came in, the managing editor just about had a heart attack. They had printed up a couple 100,000 editions that he was about to have to be sitting on. This was a story they would be telling around newspaper bars for years after this. As things got closer and closer. They were pumping out another edition about once an hour. Hoch praised jailer Tess Gallows. Asked U.S. court to stop hanging. And then finally, This is actually the one they had printed first. This was going to be the out-of-town edition. Hoch hanged. In very, very large font. One of his last wives waltzed right at the moment that the trap fell, even though she was in Philadelphia and had no way of knowing what was going on. So we're going to cover a couple of extant buildings. This is Inspector Shippey's house. Now, honestly, Inspector Shippey and Coroner Hoffman were both so notably corrupt that really almost every conviction they had should have been thrown out. But this was Shippey's house. A couple of years later, somebody knocked on the door in the middle of the night. We don't know what the guy wanted. It might have been up to no good, but Shippey just thought that he looked Jewish, which meant socialist, and shot him to death. And now at the house, there is a plaque in memory not of Shippey, but of Lazarus Averbuck. Linger on that for just a second. But the house is still standing. It was declared to be self-defense, but he never spent another day in uniform after this. And as Coroner Hoffman was always making rulings like the factory wasn't at fault, that the guy died of molten lead being poured all over him. He died of tuberculosis. Later, he would become sheriff and end up spending time in his own jail for coddling gangsters. He was widely rumored to be on John Torrio's payroll, and almost certainly was. Now, Hoch was initially buried here at Dunning Memorial Park. Emily Fisher spent all day riding around with a corpse trying to find a cemetery who would take him, but just couldn't do it. So he was initially buried here for about a day until they got word that Elmwood Cemetery, out in the suburbs, would take him. He's now buried in an unmarked grave. He was buried in a 30-year term grave, and then nobody renewed it after the 30 years, so they re-landscaped the area. Emily was still alive 30 years later, and had fully forgiven him, but got married again the next year to a guy named Frank Stein. I've been looking and looking to see if his middle initial might have been N. Frank N. Stein. But in their divorce trial, he said that she had attacked him with a roast duck and wrecked his new hat and run around with a rope saying, "This is the rope they hanged my ex-husband with. I got him hanged, and I'll do the same thing to you." Now, this probably tells us something about whether Emily Fisher was really complicit in her sister's murder, but I don't know what exactly. Shippey himself that's the wrong one. Shippey himself is down at Oakwood Cemetery. Emily is at St. Luke's, which was one of the places he tried to have Johann buried. But that is the very, very condensed version of the story of Johann Hoch. So, tomorrow night, I should really be saving my voice a little bit. Tomorrow night, we will be doing a live music concert at 7 o'clock. I'll be playing at Capricorn. It's my first live music gig in a long time. So, it'll be a fun time anyway. I'm playing a lot of silly songs. Then next week, this time, we'll be bringing back Art Deco Chicago for the first time in about 6 months. One of my favorite virtual tours. So there's always interesting stuff coming up over here on Mysterious Chicago. I'm a little bit under. Let's look at some cool pictures. Here's a drawing from a New York newspaper of Hoch being haunted by all of his ex-wives. Here's a cartoon of all of his ex-wives waiting for him in Chicago, all with excellent hats and rolling pins. Waiting for Hoch to come smoking down the track. Now, the detectives teased Hoch constantly on the train ride. They're all going to be waiting for you, you know. All of them are waiting at the station. This is a composite drawing they came up with of what his victims usually looked like. Now, there was a big rumor that he had been an old disciple of H.H. Holmes for a while. So here's the devil, with Hoch and Holmes and the I Will lady, the Chicago mascot. Eventually, even Shippey decided that that story was nonsense. Now, there's also a picture in the paper around the same time of all the various weapons that women used. But if you're going for comedy in those days especially, you always went with a rolling pin. Beating your husband is hilarious when it happens with a rolling pin. Now, here's Hoch as he might have looked with a beard, plus several known and rumored wives. I don't know who that one on the top right is. This is Marie's death certificate. It says nephritis on it. I just noticed the phone number was 666 Wentworth. Nice. Here's Coroner Luke going through the analysis. Now, really, one reason a lot of people in Chicago thought he was innocent, I think part of it is because the newspapers didn't really go into the gory details about the trial. The arsenic that killed her was probably not administered orally. There was so much in there that they thought that one of the guys testified if that had been put into her while she was still alive, her stomach would be an absolute mess, but it's in pretty good shape. What came out during the trial was that most of the arsenic that killed her was probably administered rectally. They weren't going to be talking about enemas in the Chicago Tribune. They weren't going to be talking about Emily emptying out the diarrhea jar. Hence, people ended up believing that he was innocent. Here's one of the larger pictures. This is one of the better pictures of him. This is the picture of him with Julia Steinbrecher, his first Chicago wife. This is the wrapper of his clemency file. Some of the stuff that's in there. Amelia with one of Amelia's affidavits with some typos corrected. She testified during the trial she'd been living with a police officer where Shippy and the police officer would work her over all the time telling her what to say. And here she took back most of what she said in the testimony. There's a little bit of Marie's divorce record from her previous husband. It's a grim story. Plus a rando letter in the Cardin file saying, hey, don't kill him. And one from a Chicago American reporter who later was on the board of pardons saying, no, don't paint him. Here's another person. A lot of letters in the pardon file just saying, hey. This one is from one of the doctors who had examined Marie's body and said, no, she definitely was sick. Harry Olson, the lawyer, said, well, it's not less of a crime to murder somebody because they were sick, you know. All right, just some bonus stuff that's going on over here. So, all right, everybody. So, thank you very much for joining me. I'm Adam for Mysterious Chicago Tours. Always lots of cool stuff coming up over here on Mysterious Chicago. So we will just hang out like we always do. Thanks for coming around, everybody. I'm Adam from Mysterious Chicago. Here is Earl Father Hines with a little bit more super jive. All right. Let's lower that down. Da-da-da-da. Take it, Earl.
Well, now it can be cold. It's reaching you from the new Grand Terrace on Chicago's south side, where the couples are gaily dancing here in the cool atmosphere.
Thanks. The time lapses were fun to film.
Earl Father Hines. Yeah, but now comes Leroy Harris to sing Now It Can Be Told.
Thanks, Karen. I hope you all enjoy the music gig. Though, that I know of, he probably killed 5 people. Oh, I just pushed the wrong button there. Come on, come back, Earl. There we go. Eric, the book is coming along really well. Right now, it's mostly just a matter of trying to trim enough that I can still kind of like pretty up the prose, you know. Laura, I believe we did. Kathleen, the gig should be here tomorrow, yes. The great love story has never been told before, but now it can be told. Carroll, yeah, he came on the Stuttgart. An interesting thing, the German language newspapers listing departures that day listed both Jacob Smith and a guy named Jacob Huff, which is the name that he used when he got to Wheeling. Very suggestive, that. I watched the We Are the World documentary on Netflix. That was fun. I had like a weird sense memory. I remember like the making of clip where Cyndi Lauper noticed that her earrings were coming up on the recording. I believe there's a video of me singing that song in a bathtub in 1985, complete with Cyndi Lauper's ad-libs. My parents had better not share that. They just showed me with a couch tomb on PBS? I thought that wasn't there until March. Is it a commercial?
My heart is a tom-tom beating so fast. If this is only a dream, then why can it last forever?
No, do not share it. I'm in a bathtub in it.
Sweetly, that you are mine completely, beside a moonlit stream.
Yep, tomorrow is Groundhog Day. Hey, Susan. Good night, Gina. Glad you made it out. Oh, it's a video of both of us. You can't see it. But I imagine that song would have been my first exposure to Bob Dylan, though I took no notice of it at the time. The only person I would have known was Michael Jackson. And the only one I really noticed in the song was Cyndi Lauper. And her wow, 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 wow! I was just in her hometown of Ozone Park the other day. Bus driver pointed out that we were in the home of Miss Cyndi Lauper. Susan, that's not the part to blur out. Tomorrow will be Find a Great Friday. First of those in a while. A couple of weeks, anyway. I know these week-long school trips kind of mess with my sense of time. Good night, Heather. Bad is not a picture, it's a whole video. But no. There's certain boundaries I gotta have here. Marie just teasing you, yeah. I've been sleepy all day. I still haven't had a chance really to recover from this trip yet.
And down the groove now, we rather imagine you'll hear that famous seven brass of Earl Hines in Bambino.
Octavio, I assume it is. All I know is they asked me to come play. They offered me a slot to play a show. So, yeah, okay, sure. Haven't done that in a while. I haven't even really looked up who all is there. I'm busy working on my set list. Well, you know what came out today is this album, Shape Me Where I'm Foolish by Nysa. I've been looking forward to this album a lot. I liked a lot of her early singles, saw her opening for Sir Baby Girl a few years back, like pre-pandemic, right? Pre-pandemic. She put on a good show, but all the singles coming out off of this new album have been great. I'm excited to dive more into that. George, I'll be streaming it on here. More of a LitCon. Good, and I'm going to play songs about how much I hate books. It's only an English major truly can.
But here's rhythm and jive. Earl Father Hines, that's the St. Louis Blues.
Oh, the new Billy Joel song has dropped? Honestly, I kind of respected the hustle. Recently at a concert, Billy Joel asked if people wanted to hear some new stuff. They all went, yeah! And he said, sorry, same old shit. Having not really varied his set list or put out new material in the last 30 years, since River of Dreams came out. Hey, Alex. After we log off, it'll be up to watch if you want. I realized I could really put a lot more stuff into this tour. There's nothing here about his time as Fred Dessing. And all of his New York marriages, one of which I just confirmed. What? Yeah, this promises to be an interesting release radar night. 2 hours until the new release playlist comes out. I'm sure I got the Billy Joel called up. He was also on We Are the World, though I did not notice at the time. Yeah, Hoch Shots Part 2. I let Neural finish things up over here. Like I say, what else have I watched that was interesting? Anything? No, I don't think I have. I was too busy doing stuff. Busy week in New York, we all know about that. I'll be back there in a few weeks. Had a fine week of record buying, though. Such scores as Duke Ellington's Jazz Violin Session, Charlie Parker with strings, Sonny Rollins Saxophone Colossus, and one that I almost bought just based on the cover, Grant Green's Idle Moments, which I ended up, I didn't buy it based on the cover, I just went back and listened to it streaming I love this.
On Chicago's Great South Side. A program that reached you from Chicago. This is the National Broadcasting Company.
All right, everybody. Thanks for everybody who's been donating or joining the Patreon. More people joining the Patreon is always my very favorite thing. We work very hard to keep the Patreon moving every week, up to 4 posts a week, sometimes even more than that. Got to get next weekend stuff posted now that I'm thinking about it, but we're still covered up. We're still working. But all right, everybody, thanks a lot for joining me. I've got to get back to practicing for tomorrow night's gig, so once again, I'll just quickly plug the upcoming stuff. Tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, right back here, I'll play a music gig. And then next week, we'll be doing Art Deco Chicago, an architectural tour. So thanks for joining me, everybody. It's good to be back, and I will say stay safe and stay strong, and of course, if you can, wow, 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 stay spooky.